The hum of the penthouse party was a living thing. A thrum of designer heels on polished marble. The clink of crystal. The low, moneyed laughter that meant deals were being made as efficiently as cocktails were being poured. Scott Global's 15th anniversary gala. The placard at the entrance gleamed under a spotlight. I stood in the shadow of a mammoth potted fern. A ghost in my own life, watching the scene I was meant to be presiding over. My name is Claire Elise Scott. The Scott on that placard was my father, Robert Scott. The global was his dream. And the man currently at the center of the room, holding court with a tumbler of 25-year-old Macallan, was my husband, Richard, CEO. My husband. My plan had been simple, almost childishly so. A surprise. I told Richard the first was stuck in Chicago finalizing the Pendleton merger. That I'd be back tomorrow. I'd pictured his face, the shock. Then the wide, crinkly-eyed smile I'd fallen for a decade ago, when I'd step out of the elevator. A phantom in a black Valentino gown. Got you. I'd whisper. A private joke in a room full of 500 people. The joke, it turned out, was on me. I'd slipped in through the service entrance. A trick I'd learned as a kid trailing my father. The gown felt like armor now. Not a surprise. I lingered in the periphery. A strange pride warming me as I watched Richard work the room. He was good at this. The firm handshake. The clap on the shoulder. The attentive lean in. My father had seen that charm, too. And the ruthless engine beneath it. Here's a climber. Claire, Dad had said. Not unkindly. Just make sure you're the mountain, not the ledge he steps off from. I'd laughed then. Now. The memory tasted like ash. I was about to step into the light. To end the charade. When I saw her. Emily. My half-sister. If one was forced to be technical about blood and betrayal. The daughter of the woman my father married 2 years before he died. She was Richard's executive assistant. A family favor. I'd insisted. Over Richard's mild protests. She needs the stability. Emily was weaving through the crowd toward the grand terrace. A look over her shoulder that was both furtive and inviting. And Richard, my husband, caught the look. He finished his sentence to the mayor, excused himself with a smooth smile, and followed her. The air in the packed ballroom suddenly felt thin. My heart, a traitorous drum, began a slow, heavy beat against my ribs. Business. They're discussing something private for tomorrow. But the voice in my head was weak, drowned out by a roaring in my ears. I moved. A shark through water. My eyes fixed on the French doors they'd disappeared through. I didn't walk. I was pulled, magnetized to my own ruin. The terrace was vast, lit by the cold glow of the city and strings of delicate fairy lights. It was deserted save for 2 figures at the far end, silhouetted against the glittering skyline. I melted into the deep shadow of a stone column, 20 feet away, close enough to see, to hear, to have my world cleaved in two. Richard had his hands on Emily's shoulders. She was looking up at him. That adoring, wide-eyed look I'd thought was just her way. Her grateful way. Crazy doing this here, Emily was saying. But she was smiling, biting her lip. Where else? Richard's voice. So familiar. So alien. It's perfect. It's where everything began. Where we began. We. The word was a shard of ice in my gut. Richard took a small, velvet box from his jacket pocket. My breath stopped. The world contracted to that box. The size of a heart. Emily, he said. And his voice dropped. Took on a theatrical, husky tone I'd only ever heard in bad movies. These last few years, they haven't been a lie. What I feel for you, it's the most real thing in my life. Emily let out a soft, choked sob. A happy sob. I'm done waiting. Done with the shadows. He lowered himself to one knee on the cold terrace stone. The city sprawled at his back. A kingdom he was claiming. Will you marry me? The gasp that tore from my throat was silent, trapped behind the prison of my teeth. I tasted copper. I'd bitten my lip. I watched, numb, as Emily flung her arms around his neck, babbling yes. Yes. Oh God. Yes. Richard. He stood, sweeping her into a kiss that was deep, possessive, and went on for a lifetime. My lifetime. The one that had just ended. A strange, terrifying calm descended on me. The roaring in my ears ceased. The cold in my veins solidified into something hard, sharp, and purposeful. The pain was there. A vast, howling void waiting to swallow me. But I stepped around it. I had work to do. I turned from the scene. My movements precise, mechanical, back through the service entrance, into the sterile silence of the concrete stairwell. My heels clicked a staccato rhythm of finality on the steps. In the dim light of the parking garage, I leaned against the cool metal of my Mercedes, and for 1 second, I allowed the tremor to take me. A single, violent shake that started in my core and rattled my bones. Then it was over. I got in the car. I did not cry. Instead, I tapped the hands-free. "Call Daniel," I said. My voice steady, flat. 2 rings. "Claire, do you have any idea what time it is in Zurich?" Daniel Roth's voice was groggy but alert. He'd been my father's lawyer. Now mine. The only person besides Dad who knew where all the bodies were buried. Especially the financial ones. "The contingency plan," I said, staring straight ahead at the concrete wall. "The one for egregious marital malfeasance. We're executing it. Tonight." Silence. Then, the sound of sheets rustling. A light switching on. All sleep gone from his voice. "Richard. And my sister. Emily." I heard the words as if someone else was saying them. "I have visual confirmation. A public proposal. I need the marital agreement. Section 4C. Invoked. Immediately." "Jesus. Claire." A keyboard started clacking in the background. "You're sure? This is the nuclear option. It's irrevocable. I've never been more sure of anything. Start with the shares. My 90% stake in Scott Global. I want them transferred into the Elise Family Trust. Use the emergency powers of attorney. Do it now. Daniel. Before the sun comes up. The board will be informed by me, as majority shareholder, at 5 a.m. via emergency conference call. Richard is to be removed as CEO for breach of fiduciary duty and gross misconduct. Effective immediately. Draft the resolution." Daniel let out a low whistle. "He'll fight. The prenup is ironclad. But he'll scream coercion. Emotional distress, let him scream. Freeze everything. Daniel. Joint accounts. His personal portfolios. The credit lines. The house equity line. Everything. I want him to wake up to zero liquidity. Claire." His voice softened. The lawyer giving way to the man who'd known me since I was a girl building forts with law books. "Are you okay?" "No," I said honestly. "But I will be. Just do it. Daniel. Please. Consider it done. The wheels are in motion. You'll have the transfer confirmations within the hour. I'll initiate the board call." I ended the call. Next, I pulled up a secure messaging app. To Sarah Chen, CFO Sarah. "It's Claire. Go to the office. Now. Use the backdoor codes. Access the primary servers. I am invoking Shareholder Directive Alpha. You will see a series of automated transfers originating from my counsel. Authenticate everyone. Then lock down all financial controls to a new master key. I will send it to you. Tell no one. Not even your shadow." Sarah's reply was instant. "Understood. On my way. No questions." Sarah had been my hire. Against Richard's preference for a more malleable candidate. She was loyalty defined. And she understood power. It was currently transferring. And she would follow it. For the next hour, I sat in the dark garage, my phone glowing like a tiny sun, orchestrating the quiet destruction of a man's life. My husband's life. Each confirmation from Daniel was a stitch closing a wound. Each encrypted done from Sarah was a brick in a wall between me and the pain. Portfolio transfer, confirmed. CEO override protocols, engaged. Corporate accounts, frozen. Board members notified, 5 a.m. call. As the first grey light of dawn touched the rear-view mirror, I finally opened my photos. I scrolled through a decade. Richard and I on a sailboat in Martha's Vineyard, wind-tousled and laughing. At the opening of the Shanghai office, his hand possessive on the small of my back. A quiet dinner. his gaze soft over candlelight. A lie. All of it. A beautifully staged lie. My thumb hovered. The pain threatened again. A tidal wave. I saw him on his knee. Heard Emily's breathless yes. I selected all. 1,247 items selected. Delete. A single. Cool tap. Permanently delete these 1,247 photos. I didn't hesitate. Delete. The screen went blank, reflecting my own face back at me. Pale. Eyes hollowed with shock and a terrifying resolve. But mine. Solely mine. In the sudden, profound silence of the car, my phone rang. The screen lit up with a name I had once loved more than my own breath. Richard. It rang and rang. An angry, persistent buzz against the leather seat. I watched it. I let it go to voicemail. It rang again immediately. And again. He'd gotten the first notification. The first sense that the ground had vanished beneath his feet. I put the car in drive. The engine purred to life. I pulled out of the dark garage and into the pale, indifferent light of the new day. The phone continued to ring. A frantic heartbeat in the quiet cabin. Unanswered. The surprise was over. The war had just begun. The first grey light of a New York dawn was a liar. It promised renewal. A clean slate. But as I navigated the near-empty streets towards the steel and glass canyon of Midtown, it only illuminated the ruins of my life. The Mercedes's engine was a low hum, a solitary note against the city's sleeping breath. My phone, face up on the passenger seat, was a live wire. It lit up again. Richard. The screen screamed his name in bold, white letters against a photo I'd forgotten to delete, a close-up of his laughing face from what felt like a century ago. My thumb itched. Not to answer, but to hurl the device through the windshield. Instead, I watched it ring. On the seventh vibration, it stopped. Silence for 3 heartbeats. Then, a bright, mocking notification appeared. Voicemail, 1. I didn't listen. Listening would be stepping into the quicksand. Instead, I tapped the steering wheel control. Call Daniel. Mobile. He picked up on the first ring. The sounds of a busy home office in the background, a printer whirring. A second line ringing softly. Claire. I've got Sarah on the other line. The initial transfers are complete. Your 90% is now securely held by the Elise Trust. I'm looking at the digital signatures now. It's done. Done. The word was a stone dropping into a still pond. Ripples of consequence were already spreading. Invisible but unstoppable. The board. All 8 independent directors have confirmed for the 5 a.m. call. I've sent the briefing packet, the invoked clauses of your shareholder agreement, the summary of Richard's actions constituting gross misconduct, and the draft resolution for his removal. The language is dry as dust. Claire. Deliberately so. This is a corporate governance matter, not a soap opera. Good. My voice was a stranger's, clipped, devoid of inflection. What's the expected pushback? Daniel sighed. The sound of a man shifting from executor to strategist. From the board. Minimal. You control the vote. But Richard will have allies. Peter Winslow has always been his lapdog. He'll cry foul. Demand an investigation. Cite procedural issues. I've preempted that. The bylaws are clear. A majority shareholder can call for an immediate vote for removal of an officer for cause. We have cause. Visually witnessed infidelity with a direct subordinate, a family member. No less, creating a massive liability for the company. It's a textbook HR disaster waiting to happen. No board in the world would risk keeping him, even without your shares. But after the call, I pressed. Turning onto 6th Avenue, the Scott Global Tower, a spear of dark glass, came into view. My tower. My father's tower. He'll run to the media. He'll play the heartbroken husband, blindsided by a vengeful, unstable wife. Which is why we moved to the financial controls immediately after the vote, Daniel said. And I could hear the grim satisfaction in his voice. The legal hound had caught the scent. The frozen assets. It's the swift, brutal financial shock that will leave him gasping. He won't be able to pay a PR firm, let alone a litigator. Not with his primary accounts frozen. He'll be living on whatever cash is in his wallet. A savage, unbidden image flashed in my mind, Richard at a coffee cart. His platinum Amex declined. I pushed it away. Savagery was a luxury I couldn't afford. This was surgery. And Emily. Terminated for cause. Effective immediately. HR is preparing the packet now. Her network access has been revoked. Security will escort her from her apartment if necessary. It's all by the book. Claire. A cold, hard, corporate book. Good. I repeated the word like a mantra. I'm arriving at the office. I'll take the call from the boardroom. Claire, Daniel's voice softened. Just for a second. The personal side. Your apartment, I'm not going back there. I've alerted the building security. His access is revoked. I'll have a team pack my essentials later. Right now, I need to be where the levers are. I ended the call as the car slid into the private underground vault of the Scott Global building. The barrier recognized my license plate and rose with a silent salute. My personal spot, next to the CEO's spot, Richard's spot, was empty. His silver Aston Martin was undoubtedly still at the party venue. He was probably still there. Champagne on his breath. Emily on his arm, boasting about his brilliant future. Oblivious to the tsunami I'd just unleashed. The private elevator to the executive floor accepted my biometric scan. As the doors slid shut, enclosing me in a cocoon of polished brass and soft light, the full weight of the night crashed into the silence. The image of him on his knee. The velvet box. Emily's tear-streaked, triumphant face. A dry sob clawed its way up my throat. I clenched my jaw, forcing it down. Not yet. You can fall apart when the war is won. The doors opened onto the 60th floor. The sprawling reception area was dark, lit only by the eerie blue glow of the city through the floor-to-ceiling windows. I moved through the familiar space, my heels silent on the thick carpet, past the empty desks of assistants who wouldn't arrive for hours. My destination was not the CEO's office, Richard's domain of masculine leather and golf trophies, but the smaller, more austere boardroom at the end of the hall. Sarah Chen was already there. She stood at the head of the gleaming mahogany table, her back to me, staring at a wall of screens. Data streams flowed in silent, luminous rivers. She was a small, fierce figure in a simple black sweater and trousers, her dark hair pulled into a severe bun. She didn't turn as I entered. It's beautiful, she said, her voice quiet with reverence, like watching a perfectly architected demolition. No collateral damage, just the target, vanishing into dust. She finally glanced at me. Her eyes, sharp and intelligent, held no pity, only a cold, professional assessment. You look like hell. I feel like hell, I admitted, placing my bag on the table. But I'm standing. Talk to me, Sarah. She gestured to the central screen. A complex organizational chart of Scott Global's financial ecosystem was displayed. Dozens of lines, representing cash flows, credit facilities, investment holdings, were lit in steady green. A cluster of nodes, pulsing a soft red, were isolated at the top. The crown jewels, she said, tapping the red cluster. You're 90%. Officially transferred at 4:17 a.m. The Elise Trust is now the registered holder. The system has been updated. Any attempt by Richard, or anyone on his behalf, to initiate a transaction involving these shares will trigger a dozen alarms and be automatically blocked. And his personal access? I asked, pulling out the chair at the head of the table. My father's chair. Sarah brought up another screen. Bank logos. Brokerage interfaces. All frozen. As per your directive and the powers in the marital agreement. We've placed a full custodial hold on all joint accounts at Chase, Goldman, and Fidelity. His personal checking, savings, the secret brokerage account he thought you didn't know about in the Caimans, all locked. His corporate credit cards have been deactivated. The mortgage and equity line on the apartment are in your name only. So he has no access there either. His only liquid assets are whatever is in his wallet and the balance on his personal Amex, which he'll discover has hit its limit the next time he tries to buy a pack of gum. The thoroughness of it was breathtaking. And chilling. This was the machinery my father and Daniel had built. A fortress to protect the company. I was now using it as a weapon. What about the company's operational funds? Payroll? Vendors? I couldn't let the empire burn just to smoke out the usurper. Completely separate, Sarah assured me. I've already run the daily liquidity report. Everything is green. The freeze is surgical. Claire. It only cuts his circulation. Not the company's. My personal phone buzzed again. A text this time. I didn't want to look. But I had to. I had to know the shape of the enemy's rage. Richard, Claire. What the fuck is going on? I'm getting alerts from the bank. Calls from the club. My cards are being declined. Is this some kind of sick joke? Call me. I placed the phone face down on the table. He's waking up. Good, Sarah said. A flicker of something fierce in her eyes. Let him sweat. At 4:55 a.m., the boardroom's telepresence system hummed to life. One by one, the large screens on the wall lit up with the faces of Scott Global's 8 independent directors. They were in various states of dress and location. Peter Winslow, ruddy-faced and bleary-eyed, clearly from a bed. Margaret Vance, impeccable in a silk robe, sipping tea in what looked like a Palm Beach sunroom. Arjun Desai, already in a suit in his London office. They were the guardians of corporate governance, and I had summoned them to an execution. Good morning, everyone, I began. My voice clear and steady in the quiet room. Thank you for making yourself available on such short notice. I apologize for the hour, but the matter is urgent and cannot wait. Claire, Peter Winslow blustered, his face too close to the camera. This is highly irregular. Richard is supposed to be at the helm of this call. What's the meaning of this? Richard is the subject of this call. Peter, I said, meeting his pixelated gaze without flinching. As majority shareholder, I have called this emergency session to put forth a resolution for the immediate removal of Richard Scott as Chief Executive Officer of Scott Global. For gross misconduct and breach of fiduciary duty. A chorus of startled exclamations echoed through the speakers. Margaret Vance held up a hand, her expression sharp. Claire, those are extraordinarily serious charges. You're talking about your husband. Do you have evidence to support this? I do. I nodded to Sarah, who shared a file to their screens. You'll find in the briefing packet a summary of events from last night. I witnessed Richard, in a public forum, engaging in a profoundly inappropriate relationship with a subordinate employee, specifically, his executive assistant, Emily Reed. More critically, I witnessed him propose marriage to her. Arjun Desai leaned forward, his brow furrowed. A personal indiscretion, while regrettable, is not typically grounds for. It is when that personal indiscretion creates a catastrophic liability for this company. I cut in, my tone turning to ice. Emily Reed is not just an employee. She is my half-sister. The potential for claims of nepotism, coercion, hostile work environment, and sensationalist media coverage is off the charts. Furthermore, Richard's judgment is clearly compromised. He chose the night of our 15th anniversary gala, surrounded by shareholders, clients, and the press. To do this, he exposed the company, and by extension all of you, to immense reputational risk. That is a failure of fiduciary duty of the highest order. I let that hang in the digital silence. I could see them processing it, the personal scandal morphing in their minds into a column of risk assessment numbers, plummeting stock prices, and angry investor calls. Do you have proof beyond your own testimony? Claire, Margaret asked, her voice cool. I do. And I am prepared to make it available to a special committee, if necessary, but for the purposes of this vote, my word as the majority shareholder and daughter of the founder must suffice. The corporate bylaws grant you the authority to remove an officer for cause based on the credible representation of the controlling shareholder. I am making that representation. Peter Winslow was shaking his head. This is a domestic dispute. Claire, you can't use the board to settle a marital argument. Richard has driven this company's value up 200% in 5 years. And he has just driven a spear into its heart, I fired back. The moment this hits the post, and it will, The Scott Global CEO in love triangle with wife's sister headline will erase every bit of that value. My action is not revenge, Peter. It is triage. I am removing a cancerous liability before it metastasizes. I move we table this discussion until Richard can be present to defend himself. Winslow declared. Seconded. Came another voice. There will be no tabling, I said. My voice dropping. Low and final. I have convened this meeting. The resolution is on the table. As the majority shareholder, I will be voting my shares in favor of removal. The question before the board is whether you will join me in doing what is best for the company, or side with a man whose personal conduct has made him a clear and present danger to its stability. I looked at each of their faces on the screen. You have the packet. You have my statement. I call the vote. All in favor of the resolution to remove Richard Scott as CEO of Scott Global. Effective today. Say aye. A heavy pause. Margaret Vance spoke first. On the grounds of mitigating reputational risk, aye. Arjun Desai sighed. Aye. One by one. The others followed. Even Peter Winslow, his face a thundercloud, muttered a reluctant aye. He saw the writing on the wall. The shares were the law. The motion carries, I stated. No triumph in my voice. Only a weary finality. Daniel Roth will distribute the formal notice of termination and the press release. Effective immediately. I will be assuming the role of interim CEO. This meeting is adjourned. The screens went black one by one. The room was silent again, save for the faint hum of the servers. I let out a breath I felt I'd been holding for hours. My hands, resting on the cool table, were trembling. I clasped them together. Sarah let out a low whistle. You eviscerated him. Cleanly. Professionally. It was a masterclass. Claire. It was a necessity, I corrected her. But the compliment warmed a tiny, frozen part of me. I had done it. I had taken back my company. My phone, which had been vibrating almost continuously, finally stopped. Then, a moment later, it started again. This time, it wasn't Richard. It was an unknown number. I almost let it go to voicemail, but something made me answer. Claire. The voice on the other end was a broken, hysterical sob. It was Emily. Claire. You bitch. What have you done? My phone is blowing up. I'm getting emails from HR. My keycard doesn't work. Richard is, he's frantic. He can't access any of his money. Our money. Our money. The words were a brand on my soul. There is no our money, Emily, I said. My voice dangerously calm. There is my money. And my company. You're fired. For cause. Don't come back to the office. Your personal effects will be couriered to you. And if you or Richard attempt to contact me outside of legal channels, the next call you get will be from the police regarding a restraining order. Are we clear? She was screaming now. A wordless torrent of rage and venom. I held the phone away from my ear, looking at Sarah, who watched with an archaeologist's detached interest. When the screaming subsided into ragged weeping, I spoke again. The engagement is off. By the way, I'd return the ring, but I imagine he'll need to pawn it. Goodbye, Emily. I ended the call and blocked the number. The sun was fully up now, casting long, accusatory shafts of light across the boardroom table. The city was waking up, oblivious to the earthquake that had just rocked its financial core. My work was done. For now. But as I sat in the stillness, a new thought, cold and more terrifying than any other, slithered into the void left by the adrenaline. Richard was cornered, humiliated, and financially neutered. A man like that didn't just disappear. He fought back. And he knew my weaknesses. He knew me. The war council was over. The real battle was about to begin. Sunlight, harsh and unforgiving, streamed into the corner office on the 60th floor. It gleamed off the polished surface of the obsidian desk, a gift from a Japanese conglomerate, and lit the dust motes dancing in the air like misplaced confetti. Richard Scott stood at the window, his back to the room, staring down at the ant-like traffic on 6th Avenue. In his hand, his phone was a dead, black slab. He'd drained the battery an hour ago. Calling Claire. Calling Daniel. calling board members, calling anyone who might tell him this was a monstrous mistake. It wasn't a mistake. It was a decapitation. The intercom on his desk buzzed. A sound that usually signified deference. A summons to power. Now it was just a noise. He ignored it. It buzzed again. More insistent. Mr. Scott. A young, uncertain voice. Megan. His new assistant. Emily's replacement. The thought was a fresh knife twist. There are some gentlemen here to see you. From corporate security. And a woman from human resources. Richard didn't turn. Send them in. His voice was sandpaper. The door opened. 2 uniformed security guards. Faces carefully blank. Entered first. Following them was Janet Crowley from HR. A woman in her 50s with the serene, pitiless expression of a nun who'd seen it all. She carried a slim leather folder. Richard, Janet said, her tone devoid of the collegial warmth of yesterday. I'm afraid we need to proceed with the offboarding process. He finally turned. The guards stiffened almost imperceptibly. Richard knew he looked like hell, still in his tuxedo shirt, now wrinkled and stained with sweat at the collar, the bow tie hanging loose. His eyes were red-rimmed, but the fury beneath the exhaustion was a palpable heat. Offboarding, he repeated, the word tasting like ash. This is my company, Janet. Not anymore, she said. Not unkindly, but with a finality that brooked no argument. She placed the folder on his desk. The board resolution came through at 5:07 a.m. Your termination is effective immediately. Claire Scott is the interim CEO. These gentlemen, she gestured to the guards, are here to escort you from the premises and ensure the return of all company property. Richard stared at the folder as if it were a live snake. Escort me. This is my office. It was your office, Janet corrected. Your network access, email, and keycard privileges were revoked at 4:30 a.m. per protocol for executive dismissal. We need to collect your laptop, phone, keycard, and any other physical or intellectual property belonging to Scott Global. A laugh, bitter and hollow, escaped him. Protocol. Claire did this. She's insane. This is a psychotic break. After what she saw last night, she's not in her right mind. Janet's expression didn't flicker. My understanding is that the board was presented with clear evidence of misconduct that created significant liability for the company. Their decision was unanimous. My remit is not to debate the reasoning, Richard, but to execute the termination. Please. She gestured to the items on his desk, the company-issued MacBook, the sleek corporate iPhone, the keycard on a Scott Global lanyard. The humiliation was a physical wave. Hot and nauseating. He was being fired, packed out like a low-level embezzler. The guards took a step forward. It was the movement that broke him. Get out, he snarled, the veneer of civilized control shattering. Richard, please don't make this difficult, Janet said, a warning note entering her voice. Get out, he roared. He swept his arm across the desk. The laptop, the phone, a crystal paperweight, a framed photo of him and Claire on a skiing trip in Aspen, all went flying. The paperweight hit the window with a terrifying crack, spiderwebbing the glass. The photo smashed on the floor, glass skittering across the marble. The guards were on him in an instant. They were professional, efficient. One secured his arms behind his back, not hard, but with an immovable firmness. The other began swiftly collecting the ejected items, picking up the shattered picture frame. Let me go. You can't do this. I'll have your jobs. I'll sue this company into the ground. Richard thrashed. But it was useless. He was a businessman, not a fighter. Your personal effects will be boxed and sent to you, Janet said. As if he hadn't spoken, she picked up the leather folder from where it had fallen. You'll find the severance agreement inside. Given the circumstances, the board has authorized a payment of 6 months' salary, contingent on your signature and a full release of claims. Your benefits will be terminated at the end of the month. Any questions regarding the terms should be directed to Daniel Roth's office. They marched him out, not through the executive hallway, but through a back corridor used for deliveries. Staff peeked out of doorways. their eyes wide with a mixture of shock and morbid fascination. Whispers followed them like a toxic breeze. Caught with the sister, assets frozen. Claire cleaned him out. The ride down in the service elevator was silent, punctuated only by Richard's ragged breathing. The guards released him in the underground garage. Not at the executive bays, but near the trash compactors. One of them handed him a cheap cardboard box containing the contents of his desk drawers, a spare set of cufflinks, a bottle of expensive cologne, a stress ball shaped like a globe. The shattered photo frame was on top, the image of him and Claire smiling from beneath the cracked glass. "Have a nice day, sir," the guard said, his voice flat. Richard stood there, holding the box of his former life, watching as the elevator doors closed on the two impassive faces. The garage was cold, smelling of oil and concrete. He fumbled for his keys, then remembered. The Aston. It was still at the gala venue. He pulled out his dead phone. Useless. He had to get to Claire. He had to make her see reason. This had gone too far. He'd explain about Emily. It was a moment of madness. A weakness. He loved her. He'd make her understand. He took the subway. The stares at his disheveled tuxedo were nothing compared to the cold dread pooling in his gut. He emerged at the station near our apartment building on Central Park West. The doorman, a man named George who had always greeted him with a cheerful good morning, Mr. Scott, now stood blockading the elegant lobby entrance, his face a mask of polite regret. "Mr. Scott, I'm afraid I can't let you in." "George, it's me. What is this?" "Orders from Ms. Scott." "Sir, your access has been revoked. Permanently. I'm to call the police if you attempt to enter. She's my wife. I have my instructions." "Sir, I'm sorry." Defeated, trembling with a cocktail of rage and a terrifying, burgeoning helplessness, Richard turned away. He went to an ATM. His platinum card was declined. He tried another. Declined. A cold sweat broke out on his brow. He had maybe $200 in his wallet. He hailed a cab, gave the driver the address of a private club in the West 50s where he kept a locker. The cabbie looked skeptical but drove. At the club, the concierge's smile was strained. "Mr. Scott, I'm so sorry, but we've been instructed." "By who?" Richard demanded, his voice cracking. "By the law firm of Roth, Geller, and Klein, regarding the settlement of your annual dues. I'm afraid we cannot extend you any further credit until the matter is resolved." Credit. The word was a slap. He, Richard Scott, was being denied credit. He stumbled back out onto the street. The city's noise a deafening roar. He found a dingy diner, used cash to buy a coffee he didn't want, and begged to use their phone. He called the one person he thought might still be loyal. "Peter. Peter. It's Richard. You have to help me. This is insane." Claire's lost her mind. "The board, they can't do this." On the other end, Peter Winslow's voice was stiff, embarrassed. "Richard, look, it's a damn mess. But the vote was unanimous. Claire controls the shares. Her evidence, it's damning. The liability to the company. I have to think of the shareholders. The liability. Peter, we've been friends for 15 years. You're going to let her destroy me over a misunderstanding. A misunderstanding that was caught on camera." "Richard," Winslow said, his voice dropping. "The security feed from the terrace. Claire has it. It's not just her word against yours. It's you. On your knee. With the Reed girl. In clear HD. I've seen it. The board's seen it. There's no misunderstanding. There's only a monumental error in judgment. On your part. I'm sorry." The line went dead. The security feed. Of course. The terrace had cameras. He'd forgotten. In his grand, romantic gesture, he'd forgotten the most basic rule. In their world, you were always being watched. He called his lawyer, Mark Sutton. The conversation was even worse. "Richard, I've seen the marital agreement. The one you signed. The infidelity clause is ironclad. Watertight. It gives her unilateral control in a situation like this. She's followed the letter of the law. The asset freeze is brutal. But it's legal. The board removal is legal. She's covered every base. There has to be something. Undue influence. She's emotionally unstable. On what grounds? Because you proposed to her sister. A judge will laugh us out of court. And worse, the financial discovery. Richard, she's frozen everything. But she hasn't taken anything that's legally yours. Yet, the 6-month severance is a gift. Take it. Sign the release. Beg for a better settlement. But for God's sake, don't fight her on the corporate side. You will lose. I have nothing. Mark. My cards are dead. My accounts are frozen. I'm standing in a fucking diner with $200 to my name. A long pause. Where's Emily? The question was like a dash of cold water. Emily. In the maelstrom of his own downfall. He'd almost forgotten her. The cause of it all. A new, different kind of anger stirred. I don't know. Her phone is off. Find her. And for Christ's sake, find a place to lay low that doesn't require a credit card. I'll see what I can do about getting you some emergency funds. But with the freeze, it's going to be difficult. I'll call you back at this number. Richard hung up the greasy payphone receiver. The weight of it all, the sheer scale of the ruin, finally drove him to the sticky diner floor. He put his head in his hands. He was CEO of a billion-dollar company 8 hours ago. Now he was a man with a broken phone, $200, and a box of desk trinkets, sitting in a vinyl booth that smelled of old grease. He used his last coins to call Emily's number from the payphone again. This time, it rang. Richard. Her voice was a panicked shriek. Oh my God. Richard. They fired me. For cause. They're sending my things in a box. My keycard doesn't work. My apartment building manager called, saying there's an issue with the lease. The lease is through the company. They're evicting me. Where are you? He asked. His voice dull. At my apartment. Packing. They gave me until noon. Where are you? What's happening? My credit cards are all being declined. A grim smile touched his lips. So, Claire had been thorough. Emily was cut off too. The princess was feeling the pinch. Meet me at the place. You know the one. The cafe near the park. Use cash. An hour later, they faced each other across a small, wobbly table. Emily looked like a different person from the glowing woman of the night before. Her eyes were puffy, her face pale under hastily applied makeup. She clutched a large suitcase. He was still in his rumpled evening clothes. Drawing stares. What did you do? She hissed, leaning forward. You said it was all handled. You said she'd be reasonable. That she'd just slink away with her tail between her legs. I didn't think she'd nuke the entire world. Emily. He shot back, keeping his voice low. I didn't think she had it in her. Well, she did. And now I have nothing. You promised me a life. You promised me security. Instead, I'm getting evicted and I have a termination for cause on my record. I'll never work in this city again. Her whining fear, so different from her usual adoration, grated on him. This isn't just happening to you. She's frozen everything. I'm locked out of my own home. The board fired me. I have $200. The number, spoken aloud in the shabby cafe, seemed to hang in the air between them. The grand future he'd painted for her, the penthouse, the travel, the status, dissolved into the reality of a maxed-out credit line and a suitcase in a coffee shop. Emily's face changed. The fear melted, replaced by a calculating coldness he'd only glimpsed before. Okay. So, we're in trouble. But you're not powerless. You know things. About the company. About her. About her father. Richard looked at her sharply. What about her father? You told me once that the old man's death was convenient. For you. For the company's new direction. She leaned in even closer. Her voice a whisper. You said the board never would have approved the Asia divestiture if Robert Scott was still alive. You said he was becoming a problem. A chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning went down Richard's spine. That was a figure of speech. He was sick. Was he? Emily held his gaze. You were the one managing his care. Picking the doctors. You were the one who found him that night. Richard stared at her. The frightened girl was gone. In her place was something harder, sharper, and far more dangerous. In his desperation, in his need for an ally, he'd shared too much. He'd confided his frustrations, his ambitions. He'd never outright said anything, but he'd hinted, and she had listened, and remembered. "What are you suggesting?" he asked slowly. "I'm not suggesting anything," Emily said, sitting back, a strange smile playing on her lips. "I'm just thinking out loud. Claire has all the money, all the power, all the evidence right now. But what if we had something too? Something bigger than an affair. Something that would make her look like the villain. Or at least, make her back off." The idea was monstrous. It was also, in the depths of his utter ruin, a spark. A terrible, dark spark. "It's insane. There's nothing there, isn't there?" Emily pressed. "You told me the medication made him confused. That he was seeing threats that weren't there. What if he wasn't confused? What if he saw the threat clearly?" She let the implication hang. "We just need to encourage people to ask questions. Starting with Claire. If she's busy looking over her shoulder at her father's grave, maybe she won't have time to keep her foot on our necks." Richard was silent for a long time. The moral cliff edge he'd been teetering on since the moment he'd first kissed Emily in a dark office after hours now seemed to crumble away beneath him. Below was an abyss, but Claire had already pushed him into free fall. What was one more step down? He looked at Emily. Really looked at her. The beautiful, opportunistic, mercenary creature he'd chosen. His partner in crime. His only ally in the wreckage. "We'd need proof," he whispered. "Or the convincing suggestion of it." Emily's smile widened. It didn't reach her eyes. "I might have an idea. I was his stepdaughter. Remember? I had access. I was in that house. And Claire was always at the office. Playing CEO in training. She wasn't there at the end. Not like I was." The spark ignited into a small, cold flame. Revenge. Not just for today, but for everything. For the way Robert Scott had always looked at him, like a useful tool, not a son. For the way Claire, even in love, had always held the ultimate power. The Scott name, the Scott shares. They had taken everything from him. Now, he would take something from them. Their peace, their legacy, their saintly memory of a dying old man. He reached across the table and took her hand. It was cold. "Okay," he said. The word was a pact with the devil he'd already invited in. "Tell me your idea." Outside the cafe, the city moved on, oblivious to the conspiracy being born over cold coffee. In her austere boardroom, Claire Scott was signing papers, reclaiming a kingdom. And in a cheap diner, her husband and her sister were plotting to dig up a body. The fallout was just beginning to settle. And in its radioactive dust, something new and poisonous was starting to grow. The silence in the Scott Global boardroom was a living thing, thick with the ghosts of decisions made and lives unmade. I'd been there for hours, a sentinel at the helm of the ship I'd just commandeered. Paperwork was signed. Press releases, vetted by a pale and grim-faced PR team, were queued for a 9 a.m. release. The world would know by lunchtime. My body hummed with a sick, electric fatigue. Adrenaline had burned off, leaving behind a cold, hollow ache. I'd won. I'd taken it all back. So why did I feel like I was standing on the edge of a cliff, staring into a void? My phone, now set to only allow calls from a handful of numbers, buzzed. It was Sarah. From her command post in finance. "He's here," she said, her voice tinny through the speaker. "In the garage. The security feed shows him getting out of a taxi. He looks rough. He's arguing with the guard at the service entrance. He doesn't have a keycard, but the guard is letting him through. He's heading for the private elevator bank." A strange calm settled over me. I'd known he would come. A cornered animal always does. "Let him up," I said. "But have security on standby in the lobby outside. No one comes in unless I call." "Claire, you don't have to do this alone." "Yes," I said, my eyes fixed on the door. "I do." 10 minutes later, the soft ping of the arriving elevator echoed in the silent reception area. I didn't move from my seat at the head of the boardroom table. I heard his footsteps. Uneven. Frantic. On the marble. He appeared in the doorway. The sight of him was a physical blow. The Richard the First knew was a creature of impeccable, powerful grooming. This man was his ghost. His tuxedo shirt was a wrinkled disaster. Untucked and stained. His eyes were wild. Bloodshot caverns. He'd lost his jacket somewhere. He looked, for the first time since I'd known him, small. Claire. My name was a gasp. A plea. And a curse all at once. Richard. My voice was a flat, administrative drone. You're trespassing. Your access was revoked. He let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. Trespassing. This is my company. My life. Not anymore. I gestured to the chair at the far end of the long table. The one reserved for the most junior attendee. You can sit. You have 5 minutes. He didn't sit. He stalked towards me, his hands planted on the polished wood, leaning forward until I could smell the stale sweat and desperation on him. What the hell have you done? My accounts are frozen. My cards are dead. The board, they fired me. I got a severance agreement. Do you have any idea what you've done? I have a very clear idea, I said, meeting his furious gaze without blinking. I've removed a hostile agent from the company. I've protected my assets. I've enforced the terms of a contract you willingly signed. A contract. This isn't about a contract, Claire. This is about us. This is about you losing your goddamn mind because you saw something you misunderstood. A hot spike of pure, undiluted rage shot through the ice in my veins. Misunderstood, I said, my voice dropping to a deadly whisper. I misunderstood you on your knees. I misunderstood the ring. I misunderstood my sister saying yes. Please, Richard, enlighten me. What possible context could I be missing? He flinched, but rallied. Shifting tactics. His expression crumpled from anger into a mask of tortured remorse. It was a look I knew well, one he used on reluctant board members and unhappy clients. It was a mistake, Claire. A terrible, stupid, drunken mistake. The pressure, the party. Emily. She came on to me. She's always been jealous of you. You know that. I was weak. I was flattered. I lost my head for 1 second. It didn't look like 1 second, I said coldly. It looked like a proposal. It sounded like a future. Were you drunk when you bought the ring, Richard? Or when you planned the speech? The most real thing in my life. That's quite a line for a drunken mistake. His mask of contrition slipped. You were spying on me. You set me up. I came to surprise my husband at a party he begged me to attend, I corrected. Each word a chip of ice. The surprise was mine. And I didn't need to set you up. You did that all by yourself. In front of a security camera with 4K resolution and excellent audio pickup. I might add. The color drained from his face. The security feed. Winslow had mentioned it. Now it was confirmed. His alibi of a misunderstanding evaporated. He straightened up. The pathetic act falling away completely. Replaced by a sneer. So that's it. You're going to destroy me. Destroy everything we built. Over a little indiscretion. We're built. I echoed. A bitter laugh escaping me. You built a career, Richard. On my name. On my father's company. The only thing you built for us was a lie. A years-long lie. How long? Richard. The question tore from me. The professional detachment finally cracking. How long have you and Emily been the most real thing in your life? He didn't answer. He just glared. His chest heaving. Was it before Dad died? I pressed. The new, horrible thought taking shape. Was that part of the plan too? Get close to the grieving daughter. Secure your position. Don't you dare bring your father into this. He roared, slamming his fist on the table. The sound echoed in the vast room. Your saintly father who never thought I was good enough. Who would have handed you this company on a silver platter and left me to clean up his messes. So you made your own mess. With my sister. The words were ash in my mouth. My family. She's not your family. He spat. She's the daughter of the gold digger your father married. She's nothing. A convenient distraction. You proposed to a convenient distraction. I was going to end it. He shouted. The lie so transparent it was almost pathetic. The proposal, it was a way to placate her. To shut her up. She was getting clingy. Threatening to go to you. I was trying to protect you. Claire. To protect us. I just stared at him. The shifting stories. The blame. The grotesque rewriting of reality. The man I'd loved. The man I'd shared a bed with for a decade. Was a stranger. A desperate. Flailing. Pathetic stranger. You're a liar, I said. The heat gone from my voice. Leaving only a bone-deep weariness. You've always been a liar. I just wanted so badly to believe you that I made myself blind. You're one to talk about lies. He hissed. A new, ugly light in his eyes. The Ice Queen. The brilliant Claire Scott. So perfect. So in control. You never loved me. You needed a handsome accessory for the boardroom and a warm body for the bed. I was your employee. Claire. Your highest paid. Most dedicated employee. And the moment I stepped out of line, you fired me. That's all this is. A fucking corporate restructuring of our marriage. His words were meant to wound. And they did. They found the secret fear I'd carried for years, that I was too much like my father. That I valued the company over people. That I was cold. I let the pain sit there for a moment. Acknowledged it. Then I reached into my bag. You're right about one thing, I said quietly. I should have been more diligent. I suspected. For a long time. I think I knew. In a part of myself I didn't want to listen to. The late nights that didn't match the calendar. The new cologne. The distance. I pulled out my phone. Navigated to a file. And placed it on the table between us. So I started to listen. I tapped the screen. The audio was crisp. Clear in the silent room. Emily's voice, giggling. Slightly slurred, his so predictable. Thinks a new purse will make me forget he cancelled Paris again. It's pathetic. Richard's voice, low. Intimate pathetic is right. But useful. Her name on the accounts opens doors mine doesn't. We just have to be patient. My love. Let the old man's legacy do the work for a little while longer. Emily, I'm tired of waiting. Richard. I'm tired of being the secret. When do I get to be the wife? When do we get what's ours? Richard, soon. After the Asia divestiture closes. The board will be so grateful for the cash infusion. They'll give me anything. Even a divorce. Then it's just a matter of easing Claire out. A nervous breakdown. Maybe. The pressure of the job. It happens. Emily, you promise. Richard, I promise. You'll have everything. The penthouse. The title. Everything that should have been yours from the start. I stopped the recording. The silence that followed was absolute. Suffocating. Richard's face was a grotesque mask of horror. He stared at the phone as if it were a venomous snake. You bugged me. He whispered. The sound scraping from his throat. I had my phone running in my bag at the charity gala 2 months ago, I said. My voice eerily calm. You were drunk. And loud. You and Emily. In the courtyard. Thinking you were alone. Talking about me. About my predictable taste. About my nervous breakdown. I picked up the phone. This isn't a misunderstanding. Richard. It's a conspiracy. You weren't protecting me. You were planning my overthrow. My illness. This. I gestured around the boardroom. Wasn't me firing a disloyal employee. It was a preemptive strike. All the fight left him. The bluster. The lies. The feigned remorse. It evaporated. Leaving behind a shell of a man facing the incontrovertible evidence of his own treachery. He sank into the chair I'd offered earlier. His head in his hands. It wasn't like that, he mumbled. But the words had no force. It was exactly like that, I said. I stood up. Walking to the window. Looking out at the city that was now wholly. Unquestionably mine. The severance is generous. Take it. Sign the release. Walk away. If you fight me, Richard, I will release this recording to the board. To the press. I will sue you for emotional distress. For conspiracy. For every cent you've ever earned that was funded by my family's name. I will bury you so deep you'll never see daylight again. The 6 months' salary will look like a winning lottery ticket compared to what you'll owe in legal fees alone. He was silent for a long time. When he spoke, his voice was hollow. Dead. You're a bitch, Claire. A cold, heartless bitch. Just like your father. The old wound. Prodded. I didn't turn around. Maybe I am. But I'm the bitch who holds all the cards. And you're the man in a stolen tuxedo with $200 to his name. I finally looked at him. Get out of my building. And if you ever come near me again, I won't call security. I'll call the police and play them that recording. He pushed himself up from the chair. The man who had entered the room with furious energy was gone, replaced by a broken, defeated figure. He took a shuffling step towards the door, then paused. She played you too. You know, he said, not looking at me. Emily. It was all her idea. Getting close to you. Pushing me. The proposal, that was her ultimatum. Do it. Or she'd tell you everything. I didn't believe him. Not for a second. It was just another attempt to spread the blame. To make himself the victim. But a sliver of his words rang with a horrible truth. Emily's jealousy. Her sense of entitlement. Her constant, subtle digs about me having everything that should have been shared. I dismissed it as childish insecurity. Maybe it was something darker. Then you're both exactly where you belong, I said. Together in the gutter. He left then, his footsteps echoing faintly until the elevator doors swallowed him. I stood at the window for a long time, watching the tiny yellow cab that contained the ruins of my marriage pull away into the midday traffic. The confrontation was over. I had faced him, weaponized his own words, and destroyed him. I had won. So why did I feel so utterly, completely alone? The intercom buzzed, making me jump. It was Sarah. Claire. The press release has gone out. The wires are picking it up. Also, Daniel is on line 1. He says it's important. Something about your father's estate. A new kind of cold. Deeper and more profound than any I'd felt all morning. Seeped into my bones. Richard was handled. But his last, parting shot about my father, and now Daniel calling about the estate, put him through, I said. My eyes still on the street below, where the cab had disappeared. The battle with Richard was over. But the war, it seemed, was just entering a new, and much darker, front. The silence after Richard left was a physical weight. I stood at the boardroom window, the sprawling, indifferent city below, and waited for the feeling of victory. It didn't come. Instead, a hollow echo filled the space where my triumph should have been, replaced by the chilling finality in his voice, just like your father. And then Daniel's call. Something about your father's estate. I pressed the intercom. Sarah, I need everything we have on the palliative care team from Mount Sinai. Dr. Evans, the head nurse. Everyone. And pull the records from the home health agency. Everything from the last 6 months of my father's life. Everything. Sarah's voice was cautious. Claire, that's a mountain of HIPAA protected. I am his sole heir and the executor of his estate, I said. The words coming out sharper than I intended. I have the legal right. Use the firm's authority. Get it? And I need the security logs for the apartment building. Not just the lobby. The private elevator to the penthouse. For the entire month of February. 3 years ago. A pause. That's specific. What are we looking for? I don't know, I admitted. The hollowness turning to a cold, sharp dread. Just get it. And Daniel. Put him through to my private line. I walked to the CEO's office, my office now. I hadn't set foot in it since the night of the gala. Richard's presence was still stamped on it, the heavy, masculine furniture, the framed regatta awards, the faint, lingering scent of his cologne. It felt like a tomb. I didn't sit in the leather throne behind the desk. I stood by the window, the phone to my ear. Daniel. Claire. Are you all right? The press release is out. It's clinical. Perfect. But the vultures are circling. They smell blood. Let them circle. What's so important about the estate? I thought everything was settled years ago. My heart was a hard, painful knot in my chest. Daniel's sigh was heavy down the line. It is. This isn't about the will. It's about a call I'd just received. From a law firm. Breckenridge Law. The name meant nothing to me. Anne. They represent your stepmother. Diana. A cold trickle of foreboding. Diana. My father's brief, late-in-life mistake. A pleasant, vacuous former interior decorator he'd married 18 months before he died. She'd been heartbroken, of course, and well provided for, a generous trust. The Palm Beach house. A hefty lump sum. We'd signed the papers. She teared up, given me a fragile hug smelling of Chanel No. 5, and faded back into her world of bridge and bonsai. I hadn't spoken to her since the will was read. What does she want? I asked, my mind already jumping to the worst. She'd heard about the scandal, smelled vulnerability, and wanted more money. She's not making a claim, Daniel said, his voice oddly careful. She's raising a question. Or rather, her lawyer is, on her behalf. A question about the circumstances of your father's death. The world tilted. I gripped the windowsill. The cool glass, the only solid thing in a suddenly fluid reality. What circumstances? He had pancreatic cancer. It was inoperable. He died at home, under hospice care. It was tragic. It was awful. But it was ordinary. The word felt grotesque. That's the official record, Daniel said softly. Diana, through her counsel, is suggesting the medication in his final weeks, the pain management regimen, may have been inappropriate. The air left my lungs. Inappropriate. What the hell does that mean? Dr. Evans was one of the best oncologists in the city. The hospice nurses were from a top agency. I know. Claire. I know. And I'm not saying there's any merit to this. But the allegation, as presented, is that the dosages of morphine, particularly in the final 48 hours, were significantly higher than standard palliative protocols. That combined with his other medications could have accelerated things. Accelerated. The euphemism hung between us. Ugly and insinuating. Are you saying Diana is accusing someone of killing my father? My voice was a thin thread. She's not making an accusation. Not formally. She's seeking clarity. Expressing concerns she's held for 3 years. It's a classic fishing expedition. But the hook is barbed. Claire. And the timing is interesting. Interesting. The understatement of the century. Richard. Defeated and humiliated. His parting shot about my father. Emily. With her newfound venom. Whispering in his ear. And now Diana. Emerging from her Palm Beach retirement with questions. This is Richard, I breathed. The pieces clicking into a horrifying mosaic. Or Emily. They got to Diana. They're trying to what? Distract me. Smear me. Suggest I had something to do with it. A hysterical laugh bubbled in my throat. I was in Shanghai closing the Lumina deal when he took a turn for the worse. You know that. The board knows that. I know. And the records will show that. But Claire, think. If they can plant a seed of doubt. A whisper of scandal, not just about an affair. But about the great Robert Scott's death, it changes the narrative. The icy, controlling daughter who pushed her husband into the arms of her sister and maybe, just maybe, helped her ailing father along to get control of the company faster. It's a tabloid fantasy. It could taint everything. The board, the shareholders, they hate uncertainty more than they hate infidelity. The room felt airless. Richard's pathetic rage I could handle. This was different. This was an attack on my father's memory, on the very foundation of my right to sit in this chair. It was poison, meant to work slowly, to corrupt from within. What do we do? My voice sounded small. The steely CEO from an hour ago gone. We get ahead of it. We launch our own quiet, internal review. We get every record, every log, every email. We interview the medical staff ourselves, discreetly. We build an unassailable wall of facts before they can even build their house of cards. And we find the connection between Diana and Richard. Because I promise you, there is one. Do it, I said. The steel returning. Forged now in a colder fire. Spare no expense. I want to know what medication he took, when he took it, and who brought him the glass of water. And I want to know what Richard and Emily have promised Diana. I spent the next 2 days in a fog of grim purpose. The very public scandal of Richard's ousting played out on the business channels and gossip sites, a one-day story. Shocking but clean. A CEO caught with his pants down. The wronged heiress taking back her kingdom. It was almost boring in its predictability. I gave one terse statement through a spokesperson: "This is a private matter. My focus is on the stability and future of Scott Global. And let the world gossip." But in the shadows, a different, more sinister operation was underway. Sarah, armed with legal authority and a forensic accountant's mind, became my general. Files began to materialize in a secure, encrypted server, medical charts, pharmacy invoices, nurse sign-in sheets, building security logs. I couldn't face the office, with Richard's ghost in every corner. I worked from the library of the penthouse, my penthouse now. A crew had come, at my direction, and removed every trace of him. His clothes, his golf clubs, his expensive toiletries, all boxed and sent to a storage unit. The place felt cavernous and empty, but it was a sterile emptiness, a clean wound. On the third night, with a rainstorm lashing the glass walls of the apartment, I finally opened the files. I started with the medical records, the stark, clinical language, a buffer against the tide of grief I'd dammed up for 3 years. There it was, in black and white. Stage 4 pancreatic adenocarcinoma. Diagnosis to death, 11 months. The trajectory was brutal, but standard. The pain management protocol, signed by Dr. Alistair Evans, looked comprehensive. Morphine sulfate, liquid, for breakthrough pain. Dosage, 5 to 10 milligrams every 4 hours as needed. I scrolled to the final days. The hospice nurse notes were meticulous. Heartbreaking. Patient restless. Pain appears severe. Family member requested additional dose at 22:00. Family member. Which one? My father's only family was me, and Diana, and Emily, I supposed. By extension, I pulled up the medication administration record. A grid of times, initials, dosages. My eyes scanned the final 48 hours. The regular doses were initialed by the hospice nurses, M, R, J, P. But there, at 10 p.m. on the night he died, and again at 2 o'clock the next morning, were 2 additional doses, both 15 milligram, double the high end of the as-needed range. And the initials in the box were not a nurse's. They were D. S. Diana Scott. And the family member request noted by the nurse at 22:00. That would have been her. My blood ran cold. It could be innocent. A grieving, desperate woman, seeing her husband in agony, begging the nurse to do more. The nurse, perhaps overwhelmed or wanting to provide comfort, acquiesced, and documented it. It happened. It wasn't murder. It was tragic. Maybe negligent, but not criminal. But then I opened the security logs Sarah had procured. The private elevator required a key fob, logged to a specific apartment. I filtered for the penthouse fob for the month of February, the month he died. My father's fob showed predictable patterns, nurses coming and going, the housekeeper, the delivery services. My own fob showed my frantic trips back from the airport. My final, terrible visit. And then I saw it. On the night he died, February 18th, at 21:47. The elevator log showed a fob access. Not the penthouse fob. It was a guest fob. Temporary. Coded G114. I pulled up the building's guest log register. Every temporary fob was issued to a specific visitor, signed for by a resident. I scrolled to G114. Issued to R. Scott, signed for by D. Scott. Time issued 18:00. February 18. Time returned 23:15. February 18. R. Scott. Richard. Richard was there. The night my father died. Diana had signed him in. I had been in Shanghai. My father had been slipping in and out of consciousness. Diana was the family member at the bedside. And Richard was there. I remembered that night with a sudden, visceral clarity. The panicked call from Diana. Claire. It's time. The nurse says it's hours. Maybe less. You need to come home. I'd been in the middle of the Lumina negotiations. The biggest deal of my career. The one Richard had championed. The one that would solidify his legacy. I'd chartered a plane. Raced to JFK. Flown through the night. By the time I landed, he was gone. Diana, pale and swollen-eyed, had met me at the door. He went so peacefully at the end. Darling. Just slipped away. And Richard had called me after I'd landed. His voice thick with false grief. Claire. I'm so sorry. I just heard. I'm in the office. Holding down the fort. Take all the time you need. He'd lied. He wasn't at the office. He was in the apartment. With Diana. While my father died. Why? The question hammered at my skull. To offer support to his stepmother-in-law. Unlikely. They'd never been close. To be there for me. He'd lied about it. I pulled up the phone records Sarah had appended to the file, a list of calls from the penthouse landline in those final weeks. There were dozens to my number. To the hospice. To the doctor. And a cluster. In the final week. To a number I didn't recognize. I dialed it. My hand trembling. A smooth, recorded voice answered. You've reached the offices of Dr. Alistair Evans. Oncology and palliative care. Our office hours are. I hung up. Diana was calling the doctor. Frequently. Could be normal. But the timing. The doubled doses. Richard's secret presence. A new file appeared in the server. It was from Daniel. Marked urgent. Diana financials. I opened it. It was a summary. Diana's trust was healthy. Her spending modest. But there was a recent anomaly. A wire transfer. 1 week ago. For $250,000. From an offshore shell company. A company Daniel's investigators had tentatively traced through a labyrinth of accounts to a holding entity that had, 3 years ago, paid a consultancy fee to one Richard Scott. The connection. Faint. Deniable. But there. Richard had paid Diana. Recently. After his world fell apart. He'd reached out to the one person who had been in that room. The one person whose questions could do the most damage. My head was pounding. It wasn't proof of murder. Not even close. It was circumstantial. A grieving wife giving extra morphine. A son-in-law visiting. Perhaps awkwardly. To pay his respects. A suspicious payment that could be explained a dozen ways. But it was a story. A terrible, plausible story. One that Richard and Emily were crafting right now. The controlling daughter. Obsessed with the company. Absent at the crucial moment. The devoted, weak-willed wife. Manipulated by the ambitious son-in-law. The merciful overdose to end the suffering of a rich, powerful man. Clearing the path for the new generation. And the payoff. Years later. To keep the secret. They weren't just trying to distract me. They were trying to rewrite history. To make me the villain in my father's story. To taint my victory. My legacy. My very name. I looked at the rain-streaked window. Seeing not the city lights. But my father's face in his final days. Gaunt but still fierce. You're the mountain. Claire Bear. Don't ever let them make you the ledge. They weren't just coming for my company or my money anymore. They were coming for my father. For the truth of his death. For my right to mourn him. The hollow feeling was gone. Burned away by a new, clear, and focused fury. Richard thought he could shame me. Ruin me financially. That was a skirmish. This was a desecration. I picked up the phone and called Daniel. My voice steady as stone. I've seen the files. I want a meeting with Diana. Today. And I want you to find Dr. Evans. I don't care if he's retired to Fiji. Find him. We're going to have a very long talk about bedside manner. The past wasn't just unraveling. It was being weaponized. And I would be damned if I'd let them use my father's memory as a cudgel to beat me with. The game had changed. It was no longer about betrayal. It was about truth. And I would burn their house of lies to the ground to find it. The Carlisle Hotel's Bemelmans Bar was an oasis of old-world New York. A place of dark wood, luminous murals, and the low, civilizing hum of piano jazz. It was also, not coincidentally, a place where privacy was a currency as valued as the $28 martinis. I sat in a corner banquette. shrouded in shadow, watching the entrance. Diana had chosen the venue. It was her world, not mine, a world of quiet deals and softer power. I saw her before she saw me. Diana Scott, at 62, was a masterpiece of careful maintenance. A sleek silver bob, a cream-colored Chanel suit that probably cost more than my first car, a strand of pearls that was undoubtedly real. She moved through the room with the serene assurance of a woman who had spent a lifetime being looked at. She'd traded up from decorating rooms to decorating a life. And my father had been her crowning achievement. Briefly, her eyes scanned the room, a flicker of unease betraying her polished veneer. She saw me, and a tight, social smile stretched her lips. It didn't reach her eyes. "Claire, darling," she said, air kissing beside my cheek. The scent of Chanel No. 5 enveloping me like a ghost. "You look tired. This whole dreadful business with Richard. My heart breaks for you." "Does it, Diana?" I gestured to the seat opposite. "Please, sit. I've ordered you a gin fizz. You still drink them, I hope." A flicker of surprise. I'd done my homework. "How thoughtful," she murmured, settling onto the plush velvet. The waiter materialized and set down our drinks. She took a delicate sip, her eyes never leaving my face. "I must say, your call was unexpected. After all this time." "Circumstances are unexpected," I replied, taking a small, deliberate sip of my club soda. "Your lawyer's call to Daniel was even more so." Her smile tightened. "Oh, that, Mr. Breckenridge can be such an alarmist." I merely had some lingering questions about Robert's final days. A mother's grief. You know, it takes strange forms. I just wanted some closure. "A mother's grief," I repeated, letting the phrase hang. "Interesting. I always thought of you as his wife, not my mother." A faint pink stain appeared on her powdered cheeks. "Semantics. Darling. I loved him deeply. And watching him suffer, it was the most difficult thing I've ever endured. I'm sure it was, especially being the one at his side. While I was, chasing deals in Shanghai." I kept my voice flat, conversational. "It must have been a terrible burden, making all those decisions, talking to Dr. Evans so frequently." Her fingers tightened around the stem of her glass. "I was just being diligent. I wanted the best for him. Of course. And you had help, didn't you? Support. Richard, for instance. He was there for you. The night he died." The glass made a tiny clink as it touched the table. She'd lost her grip for a fraction of a second. "Richard. No. Darling. You're mistaken. You were distraught. Richard was at the office. He called me. Of course. He was very concerned. I didn't blink. The building security logs show a guest fob issued to R. Scott. Signed for by D. Scott. At 6 p.m. on February 18th. The fob was used to access the private elevator at 9:47 p.m. It was returned at 11:15 p.m. My father was pronounced dead at 10:20 p.m. I leaned forward, just an inch. "He was in the apartment, Diana. With you. While my father died." "Why did you lie?" All the color drained from her face. The socialite vanished, replaced by a frightened, cornered woman. I didn't. He must have come by earlier. To drop something off. The logs must be wrong." "They're not. And the medication logs are very clear. 2. You requested, and administered, 2 doses of morphine at double the prescribed strength. At 10 p.m. and 2 a.m. My father died at 10:20. The second dose was for a man who was already gone." I let the horrific implication settle in the air between us. The piano played a jaunty tune that felt obscene. "Why, Diana?" Tears welled in her eyes. Real ones, I thought. But were they tears of guilt? Or fear? He was in agony. "Claire, you weren't there. You didn't see it. The sounds he made, it was inhuman." The nurse. She was hesitant. She was following her damn protocol. But I couldn't bear it. I was his wife. I had to help him. "If that's a crime, then arrest me." Her voice had risen to a desperate whisper. "And Richard?" I pressed. unmoved. What was his role? Moral support. Or did he help you make the decision? No. Richard had nothing to do with it. He came by, yes. All right. He came by. He brought some papers for me to sign. Insurance nonsense. He stayed for a drink. He was kind. He left before it happened. The story was unraveling even as she told it. A $250,000 kind of kindness. I asked softly. She froze. The tears stopped. Her eyes, wide and terrified, locked on mine. What? A wire transfer. 1 week ago. From a BVI holding company linked to Richard. To an account in Grand Cayman that you control. It's a lot of money for insurance paperwork. Diana, what was it for? For your sudden need for closure. For the questions your lawyer just happened to raise right after my husband's world imploded. She was trembling now. She fumbled for her purse, as if to leave. I don't have to listen to this. You're clearly unhinged with grief and anger. I loved your father. You loved his money, I corrected. My voice like a lash. It was cruel. But the time for civility was past. And when that was secured, you were content. Until Richard came to you. Desperate, penniless, and full of poison. He offered you more money to cast a shadow. To whisper the word murder in the right ears. To smear me. And by extension, my father's memory. You took the blood money. Diana. Why? Were you that bored in Palm Beach? She slumped back in the banquette. All fight gone. The carefully constructed persona had crumbled, leaving a small, venal woman exposed. He said it wouldn't hurt anyone, she whispered, staring at her hands. He said it was just to get your attention. To make you back off on the freeze. To give him some bargaining power. He said you'd be so busy defending yourself. You'd have to negotiate. He said it was the only way to get what was fair. What was fair? I couldn't keep the disgust from my voice. He stole from me. He betrayed me with my sister. And you helped him try to taint my father's name. There is nothing fair in that room. Diana. Only greed and cowardice. She looked at me then. And for the first time, I saw a flash of the jealousy that had always simmered beneath her polished surface. You have everything. Claire. The name. The company. The power. You always did. Even when he was dying. It was you her talked about. Claire will know what to do. Claire will take care of it. I was just the wife. The pretty wife. And when he was gone, you packed me off to Florida with a check. Like a retired servant. So yes, when Richard called, talking about how you'd destroyed him too. I listened. The money was a recognition. That I mattered. That what I went through mattered. It was pathetic. And horribly, tragically human. You mattered enough for a multi-million-dollar trust. Diana. But it wasn't enough. You wanted to matter in the story. Even if the story was a lie. I pushed a small, plain envelope across the table. Here's what's going to happen. You will wire the $250,000 back to the account it came from. Today. You will call Breckenridge and tell him you've had a spiritual awakening. That your grief has passed. And you have no further questions about Robert's death. You will sign a sworn affidavit, prepared by Daniel, stating that you acted alone in requesting the additional medication out of misguided compassion. That Richard Scott had no knowledge or involvement. And that any suggestions to the contrary are false and malicious. She stared at the envelope as if it contained a live scorpion. And if I don't, then I will file a report with the Manhattan DA's office containing the security logs, the medication records, and the financial transfer. I will allege conspiracy to commit defamation and extortion. At a minimum, the medical board will get a copy regarding the suspicious morphine doses. The trust one so generously provided. It has a morality clause. Engaging in malicious litigation against the grantor's heir is a violation. You'll lose it. All of it. You'll spend your remaining years not in Palm Beach, but in a courtroom. And then in a condo a fraction of the size. Explaining to your bridge club why you're being sued by your stepdaughter and investigated for your role in your husband's death. The full weight of the catastrophe I could unleash settled upon her. The social death would be worse than any financial one. She paled further, looking genuinely ill. You'd ruin me. You tried to ruin my father, I said simply. The envelope has the wiring instructions and Daniel's number. You have until 5 p.m. I stood up, throwing $100 bill on the table for the drinks I hadn't touched. Goodbye, Diana. Don't contact me again. I walked out of the bar, the piano music fading behind me. One pawn had been taken off the board, but the more dangerous piece was still in play. Emily. I found her, as I knew I would, at a different kind of establishment entirely, a bleak, overlit coffee shop in the East Village, the kind with sticky floors and the smell of burnt beans and lost ambition. She sat at a small table by the window, a single suitcase at her feet, wearing large sunglasses even indoors. She looked younger, smaller, and far more vulnerable than the triumphant woman on the terrace. The princess's castle had been foreclosed. I slid into the seat opposite her. She didn't look up from her phone. I wondered when you'd show up, she said, her voice flat. Come to gloat. To see how the other half lives. She gestured with a sneer at the chipped formica table. I came to understand, I said. I'd rehearsed a dozen speeches, full of rage and accusation. Now, facing her, I just felt a profound, weary sadness. Why? Emily. Was it just the money? The status? Was I really that terrible a sister that you needed to take everything? She finally looked up, pulling off her sunglasses. Her eyes were red-rimmed and hard. Sister. You were never my sister. Claire. You were my benefactor. My pity project. Let's find a job for poor Emily. Let's make sure Emily's invited. You held all the cards. And you doled out scraps. And you expected me to be grateful. The bitterness in her voice was a tidal wave. Years in the making. I tried to include you. After Dad married your mother, your dad, she corrected sharply. Not mine. He was never mine. He tolerated me because he loved my mother. And you were his perfect heir. The brilliant Claire. I was the afterthought. The charity case. And you know what? I was smarter than you. About people. About what they really want. You saw numbers. Deals. Strategies. I saw him. Richard. I saw the ambition in his eyes. The resentment he hid so well. I saw that he wanted what you had. And that he was tired of being the pretty boy you trotted out at parties. So you seduced him, I stated. It wasn't a question. A bitter smile twisted her lips. He seduced himself. I just made myself available. Listened to him complain about you. Agreed with him. Made him feel like the brilliant, misunderstood man he thought he was. It was easy. You were never there. Claire. You were always at the office. Playing CEO. He was lonely. I was right there. The clinical way she described it, the transactional analysis of my marriage, made me nauseous. And the endgame. You thought he'd leave me for you. Become CEO with you as his trophy. Live happily ever after on my money. It was supposed be our money. She hissed, leaning forward. My mother married Robert Scott. That should have meant something. Not just for her. For me. But he left it all to you. Every last share. It wasn't fair. Richard was the one doing the work. And you were the one reaping the rewards. We deserved it. We were a team. A real team. Not some business arrangement like the two of you had. So it was a partnership, I said. The full picture becoming hideously clear. You provided the insider access. The emotional manipulation. He provided the position. The plan. And the plan was to push me out. A nervous breakdown. I quoted his recorded words back to her. She didn't even have the grace to look surprised. She just shrugged. A chillingly casual gesture. It happens. The pressure gets to everyone. You would have been well taken care of. Claire. A nice quiet sanitarium somewhere. Richard would have been a generous custodian of your assets. The bald audacity of it took my breath away. They hadn't just wanted an affair. They'd wanted a coup. My removal. My incarceration. My fortune. You're monstrous. I'm a realist, she shot back. You live in a fairy tale where being Robert Scott's daughter means you win. I live in the real world, where you take what you can get. And I was going to get it. Until you screwed it all up with your little power play. My power play, I repeated. a disbelieving laugh escaping me. You think freezing a traitor's assets and firing him is a power play. It's the consequence of your actions. Emily, the only play you left me. And now you have it all, she spat, her composure finally breaking, revealing the raw, seething envy beneath. Again, the company, the apartment, the moral high ground. And I have nothing. No job, no home, no money. Richard's probably going to jail for fraud or something. My mother is useless. So, congratulations, Claire. You win. Again. Is that what you wanted to hear? I looked at her. This girl I'd grown up with. This stranger. The jealousy had curdled into something toxic and all-consuming. There was no reaching her. No sisterly bond to salvage. There never had been. There's one thing I don't have, I said quietly. The truth about my father. That got her attention. A flicker of something. Fear. Calculation. In her eyes. What about him? Richard was in the apartment the night he died. Diana gave him extra morphine. And now, suddenly, Diana has questions. And a mysterious $250,000 from a Richard-linked account. You and Richard have been busy little bees. Haven't you? Spinning a new story. One where I'm not just a scorned wife. But maybe something worse. Emily's face went carefully blank. The skilled manipulator reasserting itself. I don't know what you're talking about. That's between you and Diana. But you know all about stories. Don't you? Emily. I pressed. You're the one who listens. The one who remembers. Richard told me it was all your idea. The proposal. The ultimatum. Was poisoning Diana's mind your idea too? Planting the seed about Dad. She held my gaze for a long moment. And then she smiled. It was a small, cold, triumphant smile. The smile of someone who still held a card. Richard talks too much when he's scared. But he's not entirely wrong. Diana was always suggestible. And she never liked you. She thought you were a cold little bitch who judged her. It wasn't hard to remind her of a few things. The late-night calls to the doctor. The way Robert's mind would wander. The things he'd say about being a burden. About wanting it to be over. My blood ran cold. What did he say? Oh. The usual things dying. Doped up people say, she said with a dismissive wave. But you put those snippets together with a double dose of morphine. A son-in-law in the next room. And an heiress on the other side of the world. It makes people wonder. Claire. It makes a very compelling narrative. She was enjoying this. She saw the horror dawning on my face. And it was her victory. Her small, poisonous piece of revenge. It's a lie, I whispered. The foundation of my world trembling. Is it? She asked. Her head tilted. Can you ever be sure? You weren't there. I was. Diana was. Richard was. We're the ones who know what really happened in that room. And let's just say, the official story is very clean. Very neat. Sometimes, life isn't neat. Claire. Sometimes, it's messy. And people do messy things for messy reasons. Like end suffering. Or clear a path. She stood up, picking up her suitcase. The audience was over. You took my future, Claire. So I guess it's only fair I take a piece of your past. Have fun living with the doubt. She walked out of the coffee shop, melting into the anonymous afternoon crowd. I sat there, frozen, the chill from her words seeping into my bones. She was right about one thing. She had taken something. Not the truth. I would burn the world down to find that. But my peace, the clean, righteous anger I'd felt was gone. Replaced by a gnawing, terrified doubt. What had happened in that room? I had neutralized Diana. But Emily was a loose cannon. Fueled by hatred and armed with insinuation. And Richard, desperate and broke, had nothing left to lose. The confrontation was over. The betrayal was laid bare. Uglier and more profound than I'd ever imagined. But the war for the truth, for my father's truth, had just entered its most dangerous phase. I couldn't just defend against their lies anymore. I had to attack. I had to find the proof that would bury their story forever. And I knew exactly where I had to start. With the man who signed the prescription. Dr. Alistair Evans. The official document arrived by courier at 8:03 a.m., 2 days after my coffee shop encounter with Emily. It was thick, bound in blue-backed legal paper, and landed on my desk with a soft, authoritative thud. I didn't need to open it to know what it was. The bold, sans serif type on the cover sheet said it all: Scott v. Scott, et al. Complaint for divorce, constructive fraud, breach of fiduciary duty, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. Richard had made his move, and he hadn't come alone. Listed as co-plaintiffs: Emily Reed, wrongful termination, defamation, tortious interference with prospective economic advantage. I let out a slow breath, the air cold in my lungs. Daniel's warning echoed in my head: he'll fight. This was the opening salvo. Not a plea for negotiation, but a declaration of total war. Fought on the battlefield they believed would hurt me most, the courts. And by extension, the public record. I opened the complaint. It was a masterpiece of malignant fiction. I skimmed the legalese, my eyes catching the poisonous highlights. Defendant Claire Scott, motivated by long-standing, pathological jealousy and an unstable psychological state, embarked on a premeditated campaign to destroy the plaintiffs, utilizing her controlling interest in Scott Global to unlawfully seize control, freeze assets without due process, and terminate employment in bad faith. Her actions, including the secret recording of private conversations, demonstrate a profound disrespect for privacy and a pattern of controlling, abusive behavior. Plaintiff Richard Scott endured years of emotional neglect in a marriage that was, for defendant, a mere business arrangement, leaving him vulnerable to a moment of human weakness which defendant has exploited with monstrous cruelty. Plaintiff Emily Reed, a victim of defendant's capricious and vengeful wrath, has been rendered unemployable in her field, her reputation savaged by false insinuations. The narrative was clear: I was the villain, a cold, calculating, mentally unstable heiress who had driven her poor, neglected husband into the arms of another woman and was now exacting a deranged, disproportionate revenge. They were painting me as a female version of every toxic billionaire stereotype. It was designed to provoke, to generate sensational headlines, and most of all, to force me to the settlement table to make it go away. My phone rang. Daniel, you've seen it, he said, his voice tight. I've seen it. It's a joke. A disgusting, defamatory joke. It's a legal filing, Claire. And it's a smart one. In a twisted way. They've lawyered up Mark Sutton for Richard, plus a pit bull from Garfield Pierce for Emily, Lydia Vance. She's a legal terrorist. Specializes in dragging corporate defendants through the mud. They're not expecting to win on the merits. They're expecting to run up your legal bills, bleed you in the press, and force a settlement that unfreezes Richard's assets and gives Emily a multi-million-dollar payday. The emotional distress claim is the kicker. It opens the door to discovery on your entire personal life, your medical history, your therapy records. They'll go fishing for anything to support their unstable narrative. I felt a familiar, cold resolve crystallize. They wanted a war. They'd get one, but not the kind they expected. File the answer, deny everything, and file our own motions. First, a motion to dismiss the wrongful termination and defamation claims against Emily based on the incontrovertible at-will employment doctrine and the truth of the statements made about her conduct. Second, a motion for sanctions against Richard and his attorney for filing a frivolous action regarding the asset freeze. Given the ironclad marital agreement, make it hurt. Daniel, I want them to know we're not playing for a settlement. We're playing for annihilation. I'll draft them today. But Claire, the discovery process, they will subpoena your emails, your texts, your financials. They'll depose you for days. They'll try to break you. Let them try, I said, my eyes falling on the other file on my desk, the one labeled Evans. Background. But we're not just playing defense. I want to depose Richard and Emily. The moment their suit is filed. Schedule them. I want them under oath. And I want a subpoena for Dr. Alistair Evans. For all his records. And for a deposition. Daniel was silent for a beat. The doctor. Claire, that's a nuclear option. You're connecting the divorce case to your father's death. Formally. In a court filing. Once you do that, there's no going back. The press will have a field day. The press is already having a field day with this garbage, I said, gesturing at the complaint. I'm changing the narrative. They want to talk about my emotional state. Fine. We'll talk about the emotional state of the man who was secretly in the room when my father died. We'll talk about the $250,000 payment to the grieving widow. We'll make their story the story. One of conspiracy, fraud, and maybe worse. File it, Daniel. The legal machinery groaned to life on both sides. The following week was a blur of strategy sessions, draft filings, and tense calls with the PR team, who were trying to contain the metastasizing scandal. The business press, initially focused on the CEO ouster, now feasted on the salacious divorce claims. Headlines blared, Scott heiress accused of monstrous revenge in explosive divorce filing and sister war, Scott versus Scott in battle royal. Our answer and countermotions hit the docket 48 hours later. They were, as promised, brutal. We didn't just deny. We attached exhibits, the audio recording of Richard and Emily, the security logs, the medication administration record with Diana's initials, the wire transfer receipt. We framed their entire lawsuit as a bad faith extension of their ongoing conspiracy to defame and extort me. The judge, an August, no-nonsense woman named Eleanor Ramos, scheduled an emergency hearing on our motion for sanctions and to compel discovery on our terms. The hearing was held in a sterile, wood-paneled courtroom in the New York County Supreme Court. It was the first time I'd seen Richard and Emily since the confrontation. They sat at the plaintiff's table with their lawyers. Richard wore a new, expensive-looking suit, likely bought on credit from a store that still respected his name. He looked drawn, but there was a new, brittle confidence in his posture. He'd convinced himself this was his path back. Emily, beside him, was a study in calculated victimhood, dressed in a simple, modest shift. Her hair pulled back, no makeup, playing the poor, wronged innocent. I sat with Daniel at the defense table, a picture of calm, professional composure in a tailored navy suit. I didn't look at them. Judge Ramos took the bench, her reading glasses perched on her nose as she reviewed the filings. Counsel, she began, her voice dry as desert wind. This appears to be less a marital dissolution and more a corporate takeover played out with subpoenas. I've read the complaint. I've read the answer. Mr. Sutton. For the plaintiff, you allege a breathtaking pattern of abuse and financial malfeasance. Yet your client signed a prenuptial agreement that appears to grant Mrs. Scott precisely the powers she exercised in the event of infidelity. How do you square that? Mark Sutton, Richard's lawyer, stood. He was a handsome, silver-haired man with a reassuring voice. Your Honor, the agreement was signed under duress. My client was in love. He was not given adequate time to review. The agreement is 12 years old. Counsel, Judge Ramos interrupted. He's had 12 years to challenge it. He didn't. Motion for sanctions regarding the asset freeze is denied at this time, as the validity of the underlying agreement is now in question. However, she continued, cutting off Sutton's triumphant nod, I am granting defendant's motion to dismiss the wrongful termination and defamation claims against Ms. Reed. The termination documentation appears to be in order, and truth is an absolute defense to defamation. Those claims are dismissed with prejudice. Emily's lawyer, Lydia Vance, shot to her feet. Your Honor, the damage to my client's reputation is a consequence of her own actions. As evidenced by the recording submitted by the defense, Judge Ramos said flatly, Ms. Reed is not an employee entitled to due process. She was an at-will employee terminated for cause. Claim dismissed. Now, on to the more unusual request. Mr. Roth. For the defense, you are seeking to depose a third-party physician, Dr. Alistair Evans, and subpoena his records, in what is ostensibly a divorce and employment matter. Explain yourself. Daniel stood, smooth and unflappable. Your Honor, The plaintiff's complaint places my client's mental and emotional state squarely at issue. In order to defend against these scurrilous claims, we must explore the origins of the extreme emotional distress my client has suffered. That distress is rooted not only in the marital betrayal, but in a growing body of evidence that suggests the plaintiffs have engaged in a campaign to manipulate the circumstances surrounding the death of her father, Robert Scott, to further defame and pressure her. The deposition of Dr. Evans, her father's treating physician, is directly relevant to understanding the full scope of the conspiracy and the severe emotional injury inflicted. Richard's head whipped around to stare at me, his eyes wide with shock and dawning terror. He hadn't expected this. He thought this was a fight about money and pride. He didn't realize I'd turned it into an inquest. Your Honor, this is a blatant fishing expedition. Sutton objected, his composure fraying. A shameful attempt to drag a grieving family's private tragedy into a sordid divorce to embarrass my client. The plaintiffs opened the door to private tragedies when they alleged my client is psychologically unstable, Daniel countered calmly. We are merely walking through it to show the cause of that instability, their own malicious actions. The security logs and financial transfer we've included show a troubling connection between Mr. Scott and events in Mr. Robert Scott's final hours. Dr. Evans's testimony is necessary to separate medical fact from malicious fiction. Judge Ramos peered over her glasses, her gaze shifting between the two tables. The courtroom was silent. This is highly unorthodox, she said slowly, and the potential for prejudice is significant. However, the defense has made a threshold showing of relevance. I will allow the deposition of Dr. Evans, limited strictly to his medical treatment of Robert Scott and his communications with the family regarding medication in the final week of life. The record subpoena is granted, with a protective order for patient privacy regarding any other individuals. Any attempt to stray into broader speculation will be met with swift sanctions. Do I make myself clear, Mr. Roth? Crystal clear. Your Honor. Good. I am also granting the defense's request to depose the plaintiffs first. Mr. Scott and Ms. Reed will make themselves available within 14 days. This case will not become a circus in my courtroom. We will proceed with order. And with speed. Next conference is in 30 days. I expect you all to have explored settlement by then. She banged her gavel. Adjourned. We stood as the judge left. The victory was partial, but critical. We had pierced their narrative and planted the seed of a far more dangerous one. We had also gotten the right to depose Evans. Richard stormed over, ignoring Daniel, his face a mask of fury. You insane bitch, he hissed. Low enough for only me to hear. You're dragging your father's corpse into court. For what? To punish me. I turned to face him, my expression serene. No, Richard. To find out why you were in his apartment when he died. And what you and Diana talked about after you wrote her a check. The discovery is just beginning. I'll see you in your deposition. Under oath. I'd think very carefully about your answers. The color drained from his face. The brittle confidence shattered. He took a step back, bumping into the table. Emily was at his side, her victim act forgotten, her eyes blazing with pure hatred at me. But beneath the hatred, I saw it too, fear. They had thought the law was their weapon. Now they were realizing it was a double-edged sword. And I was driving the hilt into their hands. The legal war had begun. And I had just won the first crucial battle. The battle to define the territory. It was no longer just about our broken marriage. It was about a death in the family. And I intended to prove that the real monsters weren't in the boardroom, but in the bedroom next to a dying man. The Manhattan rain painted the city in streaks of blurred neon and greasy yellow light. Inside the sterile, fluorescent bright conference room of the DA's Economic Crimes Division, the only colors were the cold gray of the metal table and the pale blue of the files spread before me. I traded the boardroom for the war room. And the enemy was no longer just my husband, but the specter of a crime. Across from me sat Detective Vincent Caruso, a man built like a fire hydrant with a face that had seen every variety of human deceit. His partner, a sharp-eyed woman named Alvarez, leaned against the wall, observing. The air hummed with a different kind of tension, not corporate, but criminal. He'll deny it, Caruso said. His Brooklyn accent sandpaper rough. We've got the money trail, the $250,000 from the shell company to Diana. The consultancy fees from that same entity to Richard 3 years ago. We've got the security logs putting him in the apartment. We've got the medical anomalies. We've got motive out the wazoo. What we don't have is a witness. Diana Scott has clammed up tighter than a drum since you met with her. She returned the money, signed the affidavit. She's not talking. And without her saying he suggested or pressured her regarding the medication, it's all circumstantial, I finished. The familiar cold knot tightening in my stomach. He'll say he was there to support his stepmother-in-law. He'll say the money to Diana was an unrelated, belated gift. He'll say the medical dosing was a tragic error by a grieving woman. The worst he faces is a messy civil suit and looking like a bastard. Not a criminal. Correct, Alvarez said, pushing off the wall. The DA wants a win. Ms. Scott. But he wants a solid win. We need something that puts words in his mouth. A suggestion. A direction. Something that moves this from maybe to probable cause. Right now, it's a he said, dying man said situation. I looked at the central piece of their evidence board. A timeline. At the heart of it was the deposition of Dr. Alistair Evans, taken 2 days prior. The elderly oncologist, retired and living in Sarasota, had been precise, clinical, and ultimately unhelpful. Yes, the final morphine doses were high, but not outside the realm of possibility for intractable suffering. Yes, Diana had called him frequently, distraught. No, Richard Scott had never spoken to him directly. No, he had no reason to believe it was anything but a tragic end to a terminal illness. He was a shield, not a sword. Richard's deposition was scheduled for tomorrow. He would be coached, polished, and shielded by his lawyer. He would admit nothing. We need to change the game, I said, my voice quiet in the hum of the overhead lights. We need him to think he's won, to think the pressure is off, and the money is within reach again. Caruso's eyes narrowed. What's on your mind? A sting, I said. The word tasting of both metal and possibility. But not with you. With me. He wants access to funds. He's desperate. He and Emily are living in some corporate rental, burning through what little credit he has left. The lawsuit is his lifeline. What if he thought there was a faster way? A side door. You're not a cop. Ms. Scott, Alvarez said, her tone wary. This isn't some corporate negotiation. It's dangerous. Everything has been dangerous since I walked onto that terrace, I replied, meeting her gaze. He doesn't fear me in a courtroom. He pities me. He thinks I'm emotional, unstable, lashing out. He thinks he can manipulate me. So let him try. But on our terms. With your wires and your backup. Caruso and Alvarez exchanged a long look. It was against procedure. It was risky. It was also, they knew, possibly the only way to crack a man who had just walked through a legal minefield unscathed. What's the play? Caruso finally asked. 2 days later, the message was sent from a blocked number to Richard's burner phone. A number only a handful of people had, a number I'd gotten from a very anxious, very cooperative Diana. Unknown, Richard. It's Claire. We need to talk. Not through lawyers. The things coming out, about my father. I can't live with this. There's a way to make it stop. For both of us. Tonight. 11 p.m. The old boathouse in the park. By the model sailboat pond. Come alone. Tell no one. If I see Emily or a lawyer, I walk and you get nothing. I stood with Caruso and Alvarez in a dim surveillance van parked 300 yards away. Nestled among park service vehicles. The van smelled of stale coffee and nervous sweat. A bank of monitors showed feeds from 4 hidden cameras we'd placed around the secluded, dilapidated boathouse, a place we'd gone to often in the first years of our marriage. A place of supposed innocence. He'll be wired, Alvarez murmured, adjusting a headset. His lawyer would insist on it. For his protection. I'm counting on it, I said. My own slender microphone taped to my chest. A wire snaking beneath my black turtleneck. My heart was a frantic bird against my ribs. This wasn't a board vote. This was the jungle. At 10:58 p.m., a figure emerged from the path, shoulders hunched against the chill drizzle. Richard. Alone. He paused at the edge of the circle of faint light from a broken lamppost, scanning the shadows. He looked gaunt, haunted, but there was a new, feverish glint in his eyes, the glint of a gambler seeing his last chance. I stepped out of the deeper shadows of the boathouse entrance. I'd dressed down, jeans, boots, a worn leather jacket. I looked tired, vulnerable. I felt terrified. "Claire," he said, stopping 10 feet away. His voice was cautious, edged with suspicion. "This is a hell of a place for a chat." "It's private," I said, letting my voice waver just slightly. "And I'm done with having our lives played out in public. Done with the lawyers, the filings, the horrible things they're saying about Dad." I wrapped my arms around myself, a gesture of cold and distress. He took a step closer, sensing weakness, the predator reawakening. "You started that, Claire, dragging Evans into it, trying to make me look like a monster." I was angry. I was hurt. I shot back, the emotion real, channeling the raw wound of the last month. "But this rumor that you were involved, that you and Diana, I can't have that out there. Richard, it'll destroy Dad's legacy. It'll destroy the company. My lawyers say even the suggestion could trigger shareholder lawsuits." I looked down, as if ashamed. "I just want it to stop. I want you to go away." A slow, incredulous smile spread across his face. The smile of a man who thinks the tide has turned. "Go away. That's rich. You stole everything I have and you want me to go away." "I'll unfreeze the liquid accounts," I said quickly, the words tumbling out as if I'd been rehearsing a desperate plea. "Not the shares. Not the CEO title. But the money in your checking. Your investments. Maybe a one-time settlement. A few million. Enough to start over. Somewhere else. Far away from here. From the press." His eyes gleamed in the half-light. "Cash. Liquidity. The thing he needed most. A few million. Claire, my severance package alone was worth 10. You owe me, I don't owe you anything." I flared, then visibly reined myself in, playing the unstable heiress on the edge. "This is a gift. To make you stop. To make this all stop." I pressed my fingers to my temples. "But you have to promise. You have to sign something saying you'll never speak about my father's death again. That you'll recant any insinuations. And Emily has to sign it too. She has to leave the country." He was circling now, physically and mentally. He could taste it. The money. And my apparent unraveling. Emily's a separate issue. But for the right price, she could be persuaded. The problem, Claire, is trust. You freeze me out once. You could do it again. How do I know you won't just drag me back into court the second I cash the check? "Because I'm giving you the check here," I said, pulling a folded cashier's check from my jacket pocket. I held it up. It was real. Drawn on my personal account. $3 million. A tangible talisman of my supposed surrender. "Tonight. And you give me the signed agreement. Right here. Then it's over." He stared at the check, hypnotized. It was more money than he'd touched in weeks. "A lifeline. And the rumors about your father. What makes you think I can stop them? Diana is the one with questions." This was the precipice. I made my voice small, broken. "You were there, Richard. That night. You know what happened. You can tell them, you can tell everyone it was just a sad, natural death. That Diana was confused. That the medication was a mercy. You can make the story go away. Because you're part of the story." I looked up at him. Tears I didn't have to fake stinging my eyes. "Just tell me it was a mercy, Richard. That it wasn't anything else. And take the money. And go." The manipulation was exquisite. I was offering him everything he wanted: money, vindication, a way out, and all he had to do was confirm a version of events. A version that just happened to acknowledge his intimate knowledge and role in shaping the narrative. He took another step. Close enough now that I could smell the cheap whiskey on his breath. His gaze flickered from the check to my face. greed and a twisted sense of triumph warring in his eyes. It was a mercy. Claire, he said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial, oily tone. You have to believe that. The man was in hell. Diana, she couldn't stand to see it. She did what any loving spouse would do. She ended his suffering. I was just there to support her. To help her through it. To make sure she didn't fall apart and say the wrong thing to the wrong people afterward. He reached for the check. It was a tragic, private family matter. It should stay that way. My blood turned to ice. He was admitting it. Not in a courtroom. But here. In the dark. Thinking he was making a deal. He was confirming the timeline. The motive. The cover-up. And the money you gave Diana last week. I pressed. My voice a trembling whisper. That was for her support. For her silence. He froze. His fingers an inch from the check. A flicker of primal caution. But the greed was too strong. He'd already said too much. That was a gift. For her hardship. A recognition. Nothing more. It was enough. More than enough. I let the hand holding the check fall to my side. The vulnerability evaporated from my posture. The tears were gone. My voice, when I spoke, was clear, cold, and carried perfectly to the microphones. A recognition. For her hardship in administering a fatal overdose. And for her silence about your presence and your role in orchestrating it afterward. Is that right, Richard? The change was instantaneous and terrifying. His face went from avaricious triumph to dawning, abject horror. He looked at my eyes. Saw no hysteria. Only a cold, calculating clarity. He looked at the check. Then at the shadows around the boathouse. You, he breathed. You set me up. You set yourself up, I corrected. The moment you decided my father's death was a business opportunity. I took a step back. Detectives. From the trees. Caruso and Alvarez emerged. Followed by two uniformed officers. Their flashlights cut through the gloom. Pinning Richard in their beams. He looked like a trapped animal. His eyes wide. Darting for an escape that didn't exist. Richard Scott, Caruso intoned. His voice booming in the quiet glade. You are under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud and solicitation to commit defamation. You have the right to remain silent. The rest of the Miranda rights were drowned out by Richard's roar of pure, undiluted rage. You bitch. Claire. You can't do this. It's a lie. It's all a lie. He took a stumbling step toward me. But the officers were on him. Grabbing his arms. Forcing them behind his back. The metallic click off the handcuffs was the most final sound I'd ever heard. As they led him, still shouting and cursing, toward the path. He twisted to look at me one last time. The hatred in his eyes was absolute. A fire that would burn for the rest of his life. But it was a fire contained. Chained. Alvarez walked over to me, holding an evidence bag. She carefully took the cashier's check from my numb fingers. We'll need this. And the recording is crystal. He confirmed presence, motive, knowledge of the overdose. And the payoff. It's not a murder confession, but conspiracy to obstruct justice and defraud. A jury will eat it up. Especially with the financial records. He's looking at real time. I just nodded. The adrenaline crash leaving me shaky and hollow. It was over. The final move had been played. And I had won. I had protected my father's name. And in doing so, I had destroyed the man who tried to steal it. For weeks later, the early autumn sun was sharp and clean over the Berkshire Hills. I stood alone before a simple granite headstone in a small, private cemetery. Robert Rock Scott, beloved father. Visionary, the mountain, not the ledge. I placed a single white stone, a tradition he'd loved from a long-ago trip to Jerusalem, on the top of the headstone. I'm sorry, Dad, I whispered, the wind carrying my words away. Sorry I let the wolf into the fold. Sorry I didn't see it sooner. I knelt, the damp grass soaking through the knees of my trousers. But I saw him off the ledge. For good. The company is safe. Your name is clean. The legal aftermath was still unfolding. Richard, out on an exorbitant bail funded by a shady benefactor I suspected was Emily's last-ditch effort, was facing a litany of charges. His life was a web of depositions, hearings, and looming prison time. Emily had fled the country, her whereabouts unknown, a civil judgment hanging over her like a sword. Diana, shielded by her affidavit and returned money, had retreated into permanent, silent exile. I had won. I had my company, my home, my name. The mountain was secure. But as I stood there in the quiet, among the stones of the dead, I felt the vast, echoing cost of the victory, the trust that was shattered, the family that was broken, the love that had curdled into a weapon. I was alone, truly, profoundly alone. A figure appeared at the edge of the cemetery, waiting respectfully by the wrought iron gate. It was Sarah. In her hand, she held a tablet. Even here, the world didn't stop. The mountain required constant tending. I took a final, deep breath of the pine-scented air. I touched the cool granite of my father's headstone once more. Then I turned my back on the silence of the dead, straightened my shoulders, and walked toward the gate, toward the woman, the tablet, and the waiting, relentless future. The last dance was over. A new, solitary movement was about to begin.